When it comes to storytelling in gaming, few titles have left as deep a mark as the Last of Us series. But with great storytelling also comes great discussion. And one of the most talked about aspects in recent years, the LGBT representation throughout the franchise. In today's video, we're diving deep into that topic, not to fan the flames of controversy, but to look at the meaning, the message, and the significance of these characters and their stories. Because despite what some people may think, this wasn't about checking a box or pushing a so-called woke agenda. It was about human connection, identity, and surviving in a broken world. So whether you're a long-time fan or just curious about why this matters so much, let's break down why LGBT representation in The Last of Us is more than just progressive, it's powerful. Let's start with Lev, one of the most misunderstood and controversial characters in The Last of Us Part 2. A lot of people reduced Lev's identity to just being a woke checkbox, but that completely ignores the deeper, darker reality behind his story. Lev wasn't just trans for the sake of diversity. His transition was a response to trauma, oppression, and survival. Lev was born into the Seraphites, a highly religious, cult-like group with brutal and outdated traditions. This community didn't just preach, they enforced strict gender roles, forced obedience, and yes, arranged child marriages. Lev, born as Lily, was expected to conform and marry a man far older than him. Imagine that, a child being groomed into marriage, likely facing the threat of emotional, physical, and even sexual abuse if they resisted. That's not religion, that's trauma. Shaving his head and identifying as a boy wasn't just a form of rebellion. It was Lev reclaiming power over his life, his body, and his identity. It was the only way he could survive in a world that constantly tried to define him. And that makes his story one of the most powerful arcs in the game. Lev's journey is not about pushing an agenda. It's about exploring how identity can emerge through pain, resilience, and defiance. His existence in the game challenges us to look deeper, to empathize, and to understand that these stories aren't fiction for a lot of people. They're reality. Now let's talk about Ellie, the heart of The Last of Us, and someone whose identity is deeply shaped by isolation, loss, and trauma. Ellie wasn't raised in a loving home or even a safe community. She grew up in a military-run quarantine zone where the only constants were routine, discipline, and survival. She never knew her parents. She didn't have siblings. The world she was born into was broken from day one. And when your childhood is that confined, that detached from normal emotional development, it shapes you in ways that are hard to understand unless you've lived it. The only real friend she had her age was Riley, someone who gave Ellie a sense of normalcy and happiness in a world that barely allowed either. Riley wasn't just a crush or a romantic interest. She was a lifeline. Someone who made Ellie feel like a kid again, even if just for a moment. Their connection, their kiss, wasn't some forced inclusion of LGBT content. It was raw, real, and honest. Two scared girls trying to find a little joy in a world that offered them none. And then everything fell apart. Riley dies. Ellie is left to carry that grief, that guilt, that heartbreak, all while discovering her immunity, her purpose, and her loneliness. Fast forward to the events of the first game, and we see Ellie go through even more trauma. In one of the most haunting chapters, she is nearly sexually assaulted by David, a predator, who tries to manipulate and overpower her. It's a moment that shatters any remaining innocence she had left. And that moment, along with everything she had already been through, layers her identity with fear, pain, and survival instinct. So when people look at Ellie and try to pin her identity on some kind of agenda, they miss the point entirely. Ellie's love for Riley, her relationship with Dina, even her rage and inability to let go in Part 2, it all stems from the fact that she has constantly lost everyone she's ever cared about. Her sexuality isn't tacked on. It's woven into her experience of life, into love, grief, and trying to find meaning in a world that takes more than it gives. And then there's Joel, a hardened, broken man who finds purpose in protecting Ellie. He doesn't once question who she is. He doesn't shame her, doesn't try to change her. He accepts her fully. not just as a mission, not just as a daughter figure, but as a person. That's not woke. That's humanity. That's character growth. That's love. Ellie's story isn't about representation for the sake of it. It's about showing that in the middle of horror, some people fight just to be seen, to be understood, and to be loved for exactly who they are. When we look at the LGBT representation in The Last of Us, especially characters like Ellie and Lev, it's important to understand that their identities aren't just randomly inserted. They're shaped by deep emotional trauma. Ellie grew up with no parents, in a militarized zone, lost the only person she loved, and was nearly sexually assaulted. Lev faced forced child marriage, religious abuse, and abandonment. These aren't just sad backstories, or they're the kinds of trauma that shape how a person sees themselves, their safety, and their identity. In a world stripped of normalcy, their queerness isn't just about love, it's about survival, control, and reclaiming self-worth. So no, this isn't some forced woke moment. It's a raw human response to pain. And The Last of Us doesn't just tell you that, it shows it. That's what makes it powerful. That's what makes it real.